and we are again right on time. So I'm going to just briefly introduce Addison, who is the panel moderator, and then let Addison take it from there. So this is the panel that is titled Cultural Appropriation, Where Do We Go From Here? And this panel's moderator, Addison Nace, is currently a PhD student in the Design Studies Department at the School of Human Ecology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Her research focuses on cross-cultural interactions through textiles and the boundaries of cultural appropriation or appreciation. Addison also serves on the board of TAEC, which works with Cooperativa Mujeres Sembrando la Vida and other grassroots organizations in Mexico and Guatemala. So Addison, thank you, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Kelsey. So I can just give a brief introduction to our three panelists today. Today we'll be hearing from Tara Gujadhur, who co-founded the Traditional Arts and Ethnology Center in Luang Prabang in 2006. TAEC is a museum and cultural heritage social enterprise dedicated to celebrating cultural diversity in Laos. As co-director of TAEC, Tara now guides the center's research, exhibitions, and strategic development, among other responsibilities. And for the past 10 years, TAEC has been closely working with the Oma Community in Laos on intangible cultural heritage promotion, preservation, and is now following the Oma design plagiarism incident by Italian fashion designer MaxMara on advocating for legal protection of their own intellectual property. So you'll hear more about that later. Then we will also hear from the two sisters, Linda Teller-Peet and Barbara Jean Teller-Ornelas. Linda and Barbara wrote Spider Woman's Children, Navajo Weavers Today, and How to Weave a Navajo Rug and Other Lessons from Spider Woman. And they are both internationally well-known weaving teachers. They're originally from the Two Gray Hills area in New Mexico of the Navajo Nation. Today, Linda lives near Denver with her husband, Belvin Peet, and to her, weaving is a legacy in the Teller family. For over 7 generations, Linda's family has produced award-winning rugs in the traditional Two Gray Hills style. Along with her weaving, Linda is collaborating with fiber art centers, museums, and university, fiber guilds, and other art venues to educate the public about Navajo history and the preservation of Navajo weaving. Barbara's designs reference both her matrilineal traditions and lived experience. As a teacher, she has shared her knowledge with students from Arizona to Peru to Uzbekistan, building solidarity with other Indigenous peoples. And today, her mission is to connect Navajo people to their own cultural ecosystem and their heritage by passing on this crucial ancestral knowledge. So we're going to start with 3 presentations let's see, why don't Barbara, Linda, would either of you like to begin?
Sure. I'm Barbara Teller-Ornelas. Kabayan slot po hetlini pasashin at nagani dashanan ashini dashache beat out sunanishla. Hi, I'm Barbara Teller-Ornelas. I'm of the Edgewater people, born for water that flows together. And this is who I am. My grandfather's clans are one who walks around and red bottoms people. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Linda Teller-Peet. I am a 5th generation Navajo weaver. Barbara and I are both Navajo weavers and teachers and authors, scholars, and we are happy to be here. Thank you.
Would you like me to give an introduction, or are we starting the presentations? Oh, sorry.
Why don't we go ahead and start presentations? I guess, Tara, since you're super prepared, would you like to go ahead?
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. As Addison mentioned, my name is Tara Gujadhur. I'm the co-founder and co-director of the Traditional Arts and Ethnology Center here in Luang Prabang. Very early morning here in Luang Prabang. in Laos. I will share my screen, Addison, if it's okay. To start. Can everyone see that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So let me tell you first a little bit about TAEC and what we do. So TAEC is a cultural heritage social enterprise. We started 14 years ago, and we run a museum about the different ethnic groups in Laos, the cultural diversity, different issues around identity and cultural change. We also run 2 handicrafts shops, brick and mortar shops, as well as an online shop, so important these days. The craft shops sell products that are handmade by the over 600 artisans with whom we work all over Laos. These are primarily rural ethnic minority women who are the poorest population in the country. And 50% of the income from our shops goes directly back to the artisans we work with. And we do training with them, product development, color selection, material improvement, all the things needed to help them bring their crafts to market. We also are still engaged in research with communities we work with for exhibitions as well as other projects, cultural events. We do education and outreach activities as well in primary schools. So then let me jump to telling you about what happened with the Oma ethnic group and MaxMara. So in 2019, an old colleague of ours was traveling in Europe, and she spied through a window something that looked very much like the Oma textiles, which she was familiar with from working with us. And so she sent us photographs and took a closer look at them. And indeed, they were definitely Oma looking textiles. However, they were just digital prints or printed fabric. They weren't hand sewn, hand embroidered, appliqued as the Oma textiles are. But you can see in all other ways the color, the patterns, the combination of the patterns, even the size was as the Oma were. So it was really a cut and paste kind of job, and of course, there was no consent given by the Oma ethnic group. We checked with the Oma, nobody knew about it. There was no acknowledgement of the Oma on any labeling or tags. And of course, none of this income from the sale of these products went back to the Oma either. So we wrote to the company when we discovered this, didn't receive any response from them, and then launched a media campaign, which we were lucky got quite a bit of traction. There's a lot of social media sharing on Facebook and Instagram, a lot of comments, likes. We had an online petition, several news outlets, including BuzzFeed and Fuji TV, picked up the story. And a lot of people were understandably angry, as they are when we see company brands stealing designs from many different Indigenous people and ethnic groups across the world, both in of First Nations, of people in Mexico, in Kenya, lots of different places. So this was a little different for us just because it was the first time we had seen that happen in Laos, is that we know of, and with such a tiny ethnic group, the Oma. So the Oma are a very small ethnic group, only about 2,800 people in the world, as far as we know. They all live in northern Laos, and TAEC has been working with them since 2011. Primarily on their crafts. We sell their products in our museum, but then also we worked with them on traditional music, as well as documenting their New Year's celebrations and some other rituals. So I'll show you a quick video about the Oma, so you can see more about them. Okay. So that gives you a little bit of background on who the Oma are, and the importance of their textiles to their culture. So what did we and the Oma learn from this experience with MaxMara? Well, first, when we launched the media campaign, we were met with two letters from MaxMara's legal department. They really had sort of hid behind the law. But they still also refused to admit any wrongdoing or to acknowledge that the designs that they used belong to the Oma. And they used the common excuse, which is inspiration. They simply said, oh, we were inspired by a piece of vintage fabric that we had in our collection, in our archives, and we elaborated them in an original way, which I think when we're looking at the clothes, we can see they didn't elaborate them in any sort of original way. It was simply cut and pasted. But large fashion brands tend to rely on the law, just fall back on that instead of thinking about the ethics and the morals of it. But unfortunately, there's currently no international framework that protects traditional designs, or as the World Intellectual Property Organization calls them, traditional cultural expressions, which are, designs that, like these and with a lot of other indigenous peoples and ethnic groups, are passed down from generation to generation. We can't point to one originator or creator, and these are protections that need to last throughout time, not expire in 50 years or 70 years, as a lot of IP kind of tools provide. So what did we do about this? We were lucky to secure a grant. So over the past year, we have been working on a project together with the Oma and the Cultural Intellectual Property Rights Initiative to try to create a model that would provide some sort of defensive protection for the Oma as well as other ethnic groups in Laos. So Laos is a very diverse country, and a lot of these groups produce their own traditional textiles, which we see as kind of ripe for plagiarism by other groups. And so we wanted to try to create something that would provide at least a small amount of protection, or at least a step in the right direction. So the cultural intellectual property model that we developed together with the Oma included getting their consent, working with the community, many different groups within the community, women, elders, youth, to make sure they understood this issue and to discuss with them what did they want to do about it. So then we documented their designs together with them through video, photographs, interviews, to really understand how these designs are passed down, their cultural significance, techniques, materials, meanings, taboos around them. And then we put these all together in a database, and this database was then published and copyrighted here in Laos. So I won't go through all of the details of the legal aspects of how this, why this, provides some protection, but you can look on our resource page that we have that has more information about these different groups, about this project, about the model, about what we did. We have videos like you just saw, as well as the database template itself. And so now this template is now available for other groups to use, both in Laos, but even further afield. Our hope is that this knowledge that we developed over the past year, would go on to kind of help some other groups as well who may also want to protect their designs. So just to kind of to wrap up and finish, cultural, in our case, plagiarism is pretty clear cut. It's when taking somebody else's work, but this issue of appropriation and appreciation, every time we discuss this, there's always a lot of people who question, oh, but I was just celebrating other people's culture, et cetera. So, I think what we've realized is also that it's very subtle, and a lot of times it needs to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. It's very difficult to just say, to give a black and white rule of what's okay and what's not. And we do have to recognize how power plays a role, in these relationships. And of course, none of us want to stifle cultural fluidity and exchange. I think with a lot of us who are textile enthusiasts, who anthropologists, et cetera, people who work with different groups, you know, we're not saying that only these ethnic groups can use their designs, but that there needs to be some respect and understanding of the best way for this to happen. And I can point out these photos that I have here on my on this slide. These are of the Hmong ethnic group. A lot of you in the US might be familiar with them. There's a large Hmong diaspora living in the United States. The top picture is of Hmong women who are working on their traditional hemp batik in resist-dyed skirts that are then embellished with applique and embroidery work. They're very detailed, very time-consuming pieces to produce. And at the bottom are young Hmong women at a Hmong New Year celebration a few years ago. And you can see that they're wearing actually polyester replicas of Hmong skirts. So these are produced in China by factories there and imported. And so this is an interesting sort of conundrum. These are prints that are copying traditional Hmong designs, but the biggest clients for them are actually Hmong people themselves, particularly young Hmong people. So what is, where does that leave us? You know, when the groups themselves are kind of using them. And so I won't go over time, but I just leave on the screen a few questions that I think are interesting that we could get into. Barbara and Linda and I and Addison were discussing this on one of our previous conversations of how important legal protections are, but also what kind of practical models can support artisans as well as brands. And how can we encourage, you know, companies in the fashion sector to better value the knowledge of traditional artisans. So maybe we can get into that later. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tara. And now I'd like to invite Linda and Barbara to talk more about the work they have done in this gray area of cultural appreciation and preservation.
Sure. Thank you. You know, Barbara and I send apologies because we are right in the middle of teaching a 2-week session up on top of the San Jacinto Mountains. So we don't have very good Wi-Fi, and I was unable to do my PowerPoint because I couldn't load large files. And so I figured, you know, after listening and seeing Tara's presentation, she's telling our story too. She's, you know, for some reason, I think for ethnic communities, it seems as if we have really no protections and no, people have no qualms about copying our work. And for us, Barbara and I, we are 5th generation weavers, and we have woven rugs since we were introduced to it like around 6 years old. And we are now have been weaving for over, you know, 50 years, and we're still encountering incidences of course, inspiration, appreciation, and, you know, they copy. My personal experience has been with trying to get my prize-winning tapestry that was I won ribbons at the Santa Fe Indian Market in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And after it was published on their website and it was published in a couple of different periodicals, it was copied by the El Paso Saddle Blanket Company. And of course, I had no legal recourse. I had basically no recourse at all. And it really was very upsetting. And I knew that that particular company had already copied at least, I think, 3 of Barbara's pieces. She had a chugre, she had one that we refer to as moki, and she had another one that was copied. And so when we did it, when a magazine company called 5280 finally came in and did an interview with me, they contacted the El Paso Saddle Blanket Company. And of course, right away, they yanked everything from the catalog. But from personal friends that have been in their large shops down in Texas say that they're still for sale. So even though you're not able to find it in their catalog or on their website, they're still selling them. So there's, in the area of our traditional art, and it's just not limited to Navajo weavings as well. It's across the board. People copy our jewelers, potters, basket makers, clothing, attire, everything is copied. And of course, we are one of the largest tribes in the United States. There are over 570 Native American tribes in the United States and in Alaska. And so all of our ethnic communities have our traditions. We have language, we have music, we have songs, we have prayers, and everybody's different. And so when the appropriation comes in, they like to just do like simplified motifs, and they refer to it and say it's not significant, or it's not specific to one tribe, but it really is. At the core level, everybody knows that some certain designs belong to different regions and tribes. And so we, I don't know what the next steps are. It just seems as if we try to corner one area, another problem area pops up. So basically, you're playing like a whack-a-mole. You bang one and try to make it a fair playing field to where Navajo weavers can sell their textiles at a reasonable price. But once it gets publicized, once it gets on the internet, the design shows up all over the place. And there's very limited recourse, like I said. And so my personal experience was trying to get my prize-winning textile off their website, which happened, to try to get them off their catalog, which happened, but I can't control what they sell in the store. And so we have a lot of Navajo weavers throughout the Navajo Nation and also off the Navajo Nation. And our younger weavers that Barbara and I are teaching are no longer beholden to weaving trading post styles. On our Navajo Nation, in the mid 1500s was first contact with the conquistadors and colonials. And the Spanish people brought in sheep in the mid 1500s, and that's when we started using their wool to weave with. And there was a complete marketplace of other tribes and the Navajos, and of course the Spanish and Mexican peoples. And so there was a complete marketplace. But later on, everything became very distinct. And as much as borrowing that went on, it became legitimately, designs and everything belonging to each family. And there's not a whole lot of universal things, themes and designs that are put in place. And so I think that's why there's much more opportunity for people to copy, because our weaving families are not all the same. And so some of them weave designs that have been in their families for generations. And again, not, all of us can't afford legal help sometimes. And for textile, there's really no way to sign it like a painter would or a potter would. And so there are some younger people that are like weaving in certain symbols that they know that they're the ones who wove the textiles. And when we were teaching these younger Navajo people, they are no longer beholden to weave regional styles like we did in our generation. And so as they become more abstract and they create their own design, maybe that's an opportunity for major companies for them not to rip off their designs. You know, I don't know. That's kind of futuristic. And there's a lot of hope in that. For me to say that if a lot of younger weavers come up with their own styles, it's going to be very specific to one person's work instead of the tribe collectively. So that's the way I feel about that. Barbara, do you want to?
Yeah, I've had a lot of dealings with people copying my work, and I've been a weaver for a long time, and most of my pieces, and because it wins awards, it ends up in magazines and, you know, on news shows and all the other stuff, you know. And so it's a continuing battle for me, and I'm sure for other weavers too. And I tried one time to do something about it and talk to a lawyer about it, but I had no recourse. And they told me that they might be copying my designs, but they're using different colors. And they might be copying my designs, but they're making it larger than what the original piece was. But it was always something, you know, it was always a little something that makes it not, you know, not it being copied like my pieces. And so you know, and then they kept telling me, you need to copyright your work, you know. And I'm like, how can you copyright, you know, my work? I can't, you know, because the designs I create, the designs I use belong to the thunder gods, and I borrow those designs from them. I reuse them, and then I put them back in case, you know, my daughter wants to use them or my son wants to use them, you know, and or, you know, my granddaughter wants to use them, or anybody in the tribe, you know, is welcome to use it. So it's hard to try, you know, to do copyrights and try to and do it that way. It's, you know, so it's just like it's a real hard battle to fight with, you know, because one minute you're fighting copies from Pakistan, next minute you're fighting it from Russia, next minute you're fighting it from, you know, some other country, and it just never ends. And, you know, and we don't get any help from the tribe or from, you know, even the government. I mean, they're just barely getting started with jewelry, you know. So we're hoping we're next in line for them to do something about it. But we're, you know, and I think Lynn and I and a few other weavers are very outspoken about this, and we're hoping that, you know, somebody with powers will hear us and help us along with this. But it's just been, you know, an uphill battle from the time we were little. I remember because our dad was a trader at Two Gray Hill Trading Post for over 40 years. And I remember these trucks coming there, you know, and they would just load up all these weavings and put them in the back of the truck, and off they went. And you wonder if any of these weavers got paid for them, or if, you know, even if the trading post got money for it, you know. And it was really hard to find out what happened to those pieces. And then, you know, when I started out, I went to galleries in Scottsdale, and they kept telling me that you need to take your piece back to the reservation. And if you sell it there, if it's on the truck, we'll take it, you know. And it was really hard to break into a gallery or museum or whatever without that middleman being there. You know, and it was so ingrained in the galleries and the museums and people who deal with Navajo weavings. They couldn't out and out buy weavings from weavers. You know, there's always had to be a middleman. And it wasn't until probably the 80s when, you know, I started dealing my pieces directly to customers through Indian markets. And I was able to meet a lot of my collectors that way. And somehow, you know, I was one of the lucky ones to not fall into the trap of finishing my piece and taking it to a trading post and not, and wonder what happened to my piece, and so, I always consider myself lucky because I was able to get above that. But then I think of my mom and my aunts, my cousins, all the people who are weavers trying to sell their pieces, and it's really frustrating to see them struggle with that.
Okay, so one thing that we with Barbara and me and other weavers, the appropriate resolution right now is education. It's education to the consumers, especially. It's education to galleries, museums, because for Navajo weaving, there are thousands and thousands of books written by non-natives. And a lot of them are stereotypes. A lot of them are misinformation. A lot of it is just plain made up stuff. And so when Barbara and I, with the help of Thrums Publishing, came out with our first book, Spider Woman's Children, we interviewed a lot of weavers, elder weavers, mid-career, and new weavers. And everybody has the same issues that we have. And so when we asked them questions like, what would you like people to know? And that's one thing, is that collectively as weavers, we do need to let people know about how we feel, how our textiles are sold, how they are talked about, how they are written about, and that we have to become a force with our own voices. And we sort of are on the road to do that with our first book, because our first book came out in 2018, and that's the first book ever written by Navajo weavers about Navajo weavers. And we didn't make anything up. When we interviewed, nothing was lost in translations. If the weavers wanted to talk Navajo, we talked Navajo. If they wanted to speak English, we spoke English. And so we made sure that they were happy with how we put their words into books. We need more outspoken people to do that. We need to educate more. And consumers probably, they're the ones that need to know, because they're the ones buying the products for household decorations. They're buying for their collections, and sometimes they may not even know where the item was made. And if they are buying it from a catalog, if they're buying it from a website, we always encourage them to buy directly from weavers. And that way the weavers get 100% of the proceeds. They get to know where their pieces went to. And so it all starts with education. It also starts with us speaking up more. And I know that when Barbara and I first started out, 20 years ago in teaching classes, we basically were educating just the people who came to our classes and telling them, they may be non-native trying to learn Navajo techniques, but we weren't turning them into Navajo weavers. We were educating them on why our work takes so much time. We're educating them on the resources that we gather, how hard it is. And a lot of them come out of our classes just wanting to be very supportive. And that's the way we create a community of allies. And once we got a base of that, we moved on to educating young Navajos and teaching them to become teachers, to speak up. Hopefully there's going to be a lot more authors, a lot more, hopefully some of them get into politics to where they could make, introduce legislation to help out the Native artists. That needs to happen. On all different levels. There need to be advocates, there need to be leaders, there need to be a community of people that can support all these changes, because if we don't, we're going to get overrun with people just copying us and not giving us credit. That's the other thing too, is that once someone puts up a design and they just label it General Navajo, still give credit. That's, we want that. If you're going to put up a Navajo rug on a wall on a TV show, give credit. And so little by little, I think we're doing that with our books that we are putting out, the classes that we teach. It's all about education and building a community of supporters.
Thank you so much, Linda and Barbara, for talking about your work. I think we have like 7 more minutes. Let's see. I'd love to know more about people's thoughts. I feel like we touched a little bit on this, about the legal limitations of protections against cultural appropriation, or what Tara calls plagiarism. For instance, a familiar case for some people might be the Urban Outfitters instance, where they designed a pair of underwear using some Navajo designs and wrote Navajo underwear, where the Navajo Nation successfully sued them against that, except under the premise that they can't call something Navajo unless it is made by a person. So I'm interested in hearing from Tara about your current, what your hopes are for the current legal protections you've pursued, and where successes have been, or where there might be limitations that you all have seen in your work.
Yes, it's interesting. I mean, as Linda was just mentioning, there isn't, protections, and there is this kind of feeling that once you get a hold on this, then something else pops up and something else pops up. And unfortunately, there aren't good international legal protections. That's the other thing. There are a few countries that have a little bit of protection for designs or creations by ethnic groups or indigenous peoples, or work by artists within communities. However, we're getting to this issue again of these designs not being owned by a person. These are cultural designs, so they're passed down. You can't, copyright requires that you can point to an originator or creator, and for these designs, you can't do that. So this was the issue that we learned in 2019, that, we can't literally cannot put IP protections on these designs because they don't fit what, a lot of indigenous people have criticized as these kind of Western intellectual property laws, that were really there to designed for businesses, to protect businesses and their creations. And so we also have to recognize that, the legal aspect isn't going to necessarily be the answer. I think I agree with Linda as well. I think that education of the consumer, of designers, of brands, of speaking out, of calling out when we see appropriation, when we see plagiarism, a lot of that kind of public pressure, I think, can make a difference. The model that we've created, is this sui generis model, they call it, which is this original sort of model. And that's what the World Intellectual Property Organization suggests, that basically each country, each person sort of figures it out themselves, which is okay, but isn't ideal. It's a lot of work, and requires the legal expertise and a lot of time and a lot of development. And what we also recognize is that even when somebody has to sue or take a company to court, there's power at play here. There's resources at play. These companies, they have vast amounts of resources. An ethnic group like the Oma, the Navajo are much more powerful, much better recognized. But even I would argue that for the Navajo, it's super difficult for them to win some of these. So there's only so far it might go.
Thank you so much, Tara. Linda, Barbara, do you have anything else to add? Okay. We're getting lots of questions, so I might switch over to start answering some of those, if that's all right with everyone. So in the Q&A, do Barbara and Linda think that venues like Crown Point Rug Auction might reduce cultural appropriation by having weaver-made rugs available in mass?
That's very interesting because, you know, Barbara and I, for a long time, did not like these auctions. We thought that, you know, weavers aren't getting their full value of the pieces until Barbara and I attended the Crown Point rug auction with our publisher, Linda Legan, our former publisher, I should say, because we've moved on to Schiffer. But Linda wanted us to go to Crown Point, and you know what we saw? We saw a community of weavers that were so supportive with each other. They can put what they want on their pieces, and if it doesn't reach that, they get their pieces back. And they make it a fun event for everyone where the weavers all put their names in, and of course they have like a little overhead that they have to pay just because there are auctioneers and the use of the building, all of that are overhead costs. But it's not very much, it's only like 10% or something. But then they have a drawing to where one lucky person doesn't have to pay that overhead. So you know, it was a different atmosphere than what Barbara and I feared. And I think it would take a collective like that, like an auction, where all these weavers faithfully take their pieces over there, that they are aware that, you know, their pieces can be copied, and that we did see in the audience that there are buyers, like maybe from a certain department store or whatever. But I think when we saw the weavings that were laid out, they were all labeled with the weaver's name and a photo of them, and where their hometown is from, and a basic write-up of what the style is. And to my knowledge, a lot of people who buy that treasure that little tag. And in recent years, a lot of people come up to me as they know I'm a Navajo weaver, and they'll proudly talk about their collection or the piece that they bought at an auction, and they know the name. And you know, that wasn't like that from the 60s. It wasn't like that from the 1970s. It was only as recent as the mid 1980s that a lot of auction places have really pushed the fact that, you know, they have to make sure that they know who the weavers are. And so there's, I really wanted to not like them, but I end up, you know, saying they are supportive. So that was our experience with them.
And I think because it was Navajo run, they were very they took care of their weavers. But we went to another auction that was not very kind to weavers. We saw weavers leaving the building crying with their stuff. You know, and I didn't really care for how the auctioneers and the people talked about the weavers, you know. And I remember one of them pulled up a small piece and said, "Wow, I've never seen this weaver weave a small piece. She must be really lazy this time." You know, why does he have to say that? You know, so that really turned me off to auction at that point. And then when Linda Legan suggested that we go to Crown Point, I was hesitant. I didn't really want to go because of the first experience I had with the other auction. But you know, I went because we were writing a book, and we wanted to see how that one worked, and because it was run by Navajo weavers, you know, for weavers, it was really amazing. It was really an amazing experience to see weavers happy, even the weavers who didn't sell their pieces. You know, one of the ladies stood up and said, "Even your buyer's not here. Your buyer didn't come. Maybe he'll be here next week or next month, whenever the next auction is. You know, and it was really nice how they talked to each other about what a wonderful gift, you know, they had presented, and just the fact that their, you know, their buyer's not there, that's why they didn't sell their piece. And there was a lot of encouragement from the people who were in charge to the weavers, and I really appreciated that. So there's a lot of good and bad between, you know, the auctions and stuff, but I think if it's run by Navajo weavers, you know, Crown Point auction is the place to go.
Thank you so much. And someone else also asked, can the Navajo copyright any of their traditional designs? Yeah, so one of the, some of my PhD research has been on why people can't, and it's basically because copyright is just for individuals instead of like groups of people, and part of the Western conceptualization that of like individual genius are the only people who can come up with designs. So super complicated issue. Another person asked about what about public pressure? Have people mounted a campaign to get consumers to object to those who are appropriating designs? Maybe Tara, you could also speak about the success of your public pressure campaign.
Yes, so we did have quite a big campaign, and it did get quite a bit of attention. There are Instagram pages and hashtags, things like hashtag give credit, that try to call out some of these kinds of plagiarism, but it takes people who are quite media savvy. I mean, we were just sort of figuring it out when we did it ourselves. And it's good to raise awareness. It does help to pressure brands, but ultimately, like we see with MaxMara, it didn't make them do the right thing. They didn't acknowledge that where the designs came from. They didn't acknowledge any wrongdoing at all. We hope that it would make them think twice before doing it again, and thinking really carefully and working with their designers to make sure that they're really careful about, you know, where they're getting designs from. So yeah, I mean, the media can be really used in this way. And like Linda was saying, I mean, speaking out and then trying to get the attention of people this way is super important. But, you know, it's ultimately the brands and the consumers that have to change the way in which they work based on that public pressure.
I'd like to add that one more thing, you know, because after Barbara and I wrote 2 books, I still felt a need to gather more support and to educate more. And so in January, I ran for a board position with the Textile Society of America. And you know, 2 other people ran, you know, for the same position, and they were definitely very qualified. But I'm happy that I was nominated, and my group is equity and inclusion, and so I would like to, and it's a 5-year appointment, and I really hope that I cultivate a group that will focus on educating, that will focus on, you know, advocacy. You know, we're going to see what is available to us that we can use as tools as we battle appropriation. And so I've never ran for a national position before, and I feel a little scared, but I think that yeah, with the committee that I want to bring together, we hope that we will end up you know, making some changes. I hope. 5 years is, you know, to me, it's a long time, but I think that once we get the work started, 5 years is a short time. But, you know, it's another step towards the battle.
Another question in the chat part is, ultimately, isn't the consumer who seeks cheap goods responsible for cultural plagiarism? I think of China reproducing ethnic/indigenous textiles with no culpability, and consumers seeking design without compensating the original maker.
that's going to be a continued battle. Especially out here where we are in the Southwest. There's Southwest items in department stores. They are in, in fashion. They are in household furnishings. That's never going to stop. And again, the only way to combat this is through education. And it's going to be a long time before everybody knows that appreciation really isn't cool. It's still appropriation. Inspiration is still appropriation. So I'm not sure how else to answer except education, educating the consumer. And I understand that some of them do it with their pocketbooks, but I think they really need to know the traditions, how we rose out of our extreme conditions to make our traditional art, and that it helps not only us, it helps our families, it helps our communities, it helps our tribe. So it's a collective thing. It's not just one person.
Okay, let's see. There's a few. Laura Wilson asked, where can she purchase Barbara and Linda's book?
You can purchase them through Amazon, or you can go directly to Schiffer, SCHIFFER, Schiffer Publishing, and you can order from there. There is a Native American bookstore in Minnesota called Birch Bark Books. If you want to support a Native American bookstore, you can order from them. And Amazon, Barnes and Noble. We have 2 books out. But thank you very much.
Okay, last question. The European Union has a food classification system that is used to identify certain foods and wines that are considered part of traditional cultural heritage of an area. The categories are described by regions, ingredients, and method of production, not by individual maker or farm. I'm advocating for similar methods to organize textiles in Sardinia. Much work ahead for this, and this also requires education, public industry designers, etc. Do you think a classification system such as this might be possible across borders? It would require time and education and a long collective vision, but perhaps possible.
Yes, I can sort of talk about this a little bit. Yes, this appellation system, or geographical indication as it's known more generally, is the European Union is most famous for it, but it's used across the world. And actually in a few different countries have tried using these for handicraft works as well, but it is a little bit difficult because geographical indication does have to be linked with a place. And in a lot of cases, groups, ethnic groups, they move around, so they're across, like for example, the Hmong are across Southeast Asia, Southern China. There's diasporas in the United States, in South America, even in Australia. So also how do we link it to them? But of course, I think this is what we're looking for, is some sort of creating what we call a cultural intellectual property protection that recognizes that these types of designs are different, that we can't point to an originator, that they shouldn't expire in 70 years, that it shouldn't require huge amounts of money to trademark and, slap a brand on them all the time, that might be one way forward. So, there are a few different models that I think people are working on to try to get at this issue of how can we provide some sort of protection. And as the the person said, it's a long road, you know, it requires working with governments, working with intellectual property organization, with communities, with consumers, with designers. But I think absolutely we need, we need to attack the issue from all different directions, you know, from the legal aspect, from educating the consumer, from pressuring the designers and the brands, you know, so it's a lot of work ahead of us, but I think, you know, the legal aspect is absolutely an important piece that, you know, we need to get at, but it'll depend a little bit on the legal framework in each country and coming up with an international framework that works for everybody.
Okay, maybe we can squeeze in this other question. Is wearing authentic clothing from other cultures considered cultural appropriation?
Okay, if the clothing is purchased from, like, I'm going to say like a Navajo designer, we have a lot of clothing that are woven rug dresses. And basically the woven rug dresses are for ceremonial purposes. Some of them are for puberty ceremonies, for a lot of other ceremonial things. So a lot of the rug dresses that are woven for people are very, I'm going to say specifically for Navajos, but for the cotton and the velvet and all of that other stuff, those are fibers that are the styles that came in after the Navajos were taken to Bosco Redondo in 1863 to 1868. And they saw the colonial women wearing prairie style skirts and blouses. And that's what a lot of Navajo people fashioned their clothing out of for the style. So I really don't see an issue with that, because, and a lot of Navajo designers are out there making them. And I think it's okay. I think it's great that if you purchase it directly from a Navajo dressmaker, you know, a lot of them have fashion. We go to the two premier Indian art markets. We go to Herds Fair in Phoenix, Arizona in March, and then we do Santa Fe Indian Market in Santa Fe, New Mexico in August. And those two shows have fashion shows. And a lot of our fashion designers are from different tribal people. And I know that they get a lot of their outfits sold. And that's okay, because they're buying it directly from the designers themselves. And I hope that there are protections for them, that they don't get copied by bigger fashion houses. But for rug dresses, that's different. That's different for our youth to wear. Barbara and I wear our rug dresses when we have some important events to go to. But you know, and I really wouldn't want anyone to copy that.
So I just noticed the clock turned. So to summarize Linda's thoughts, it depends, but especially ceremonial clothes should not be worn by outsiders, is what it sounds like. And thank you, Tara and Linda and Barbara, for talking today. I really enjoyed your conversation and your wonderful insights. And thank you to WARP for having all of us.